The 2012 United States election is proving to be a closely run contest, with polls suggesting that both candidates are level pegging with only a couple of weeks to go. Both leadership capability and marketing campaigns are going to play a key part in deciding the outcome. Joining me today in the studio to look at these two issues are Donna Ladkin, Professor in Leadership and Ethics, and Paul Baines, Professor in Political Marketing. Donna, how have the candidates been looking to demonstrate their leadership capabilities, and what seems to be impressing the voters?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things we have to remember is that Obama is actually trying to impress people based on his record of already leading the American people, where Mitt Romney, of course, hasn't had that post. So very much for him, it's about what he would do in terms of taking up that leader role. And I think what it kind of demonstrates is the difference between what it actually takes to lead, which, of course, Obama has been doing, and what it takes to get elected to be a leader. I think these are actually two very different things, in fact, and require different capabilities. For instance, with Obama, I think one of the things that many of his voters or many of his supporters have perhaps been a bit disillusioned by is the fact that he seemed to promise much change that he hasn't actually been able to deliver on in quite the way that they might have liked to have seen. But I think that's actually part of the reality of leading rather than just getting elected, because when you're trying to get elected, you can say lots of things about how you're going to do things, but the realities of actually governing, and especially within the American political system in which anything that the president wants to do can actually be stopped by Congress, means that there are very different kinds of skills required. So I think it's interesting from Obama's perspective because basically he's trying to indicate to people that he's done a good job in terms of leading, where many of them may actually feel that they're a little bit disappointed in the way that he's been able, or his lack of progress on some of the issues that he seemed to make promises about. Whereas for Romney, on the other hand, you know, he can almost say anything because he's not in that post. So it's really for him trying to convince people that he will be the leader that they want. But of course, even for him, no matter what he says, it's going to be very different if he does get elected to actually be the leader and to actually govern. So again, you know, it's very interesting what you can say as leader and the kinds of issues that you have to face when you're trying to govern, as opposed to how do you get to be in that role.
Have they been able to change, or has the perception of them changed as with their leadership capabilities during the process of the campaign?
Yeah, I think that's been a very interesting one, because I think perception, the way each man has come across, has been quite decisive in terms of how the polls have placed them, particularly up to the first debate. When up to the first debate, it seemed like every bit of newsprint that I was reading about Mitt Romney said that he came across as very wooden, mechanical. People didn't really warm to him as a character. And that seemed to actually put him behind in the polls, along with other things that had happened, like sort of the videotape that got put forward and so forth. But in fact, during the debate, quite interestingly, he came across very well. I think, you know, every commentator, even people who support Obama, you know, gave him a clear victory over Obama in the way that he put across his case. So I think all of a sudden, this man who had been sort of said to be very wooden and mechanical, actually came across as quite passionate, and, you know, he actually sort of put his case forward in a very sort of strong way. And this actually made quite a difference in terms of how people perceive the two candidates. So whereas prior to the first debates, Obama actually had quite a large lead in the polls, or at least a sort of commanding lead in the polls, after that, since then, Romney has been gaining ground. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way he's being perceived now as a much more believable character, by the fact that he performed quite well in those debates.
Marketing campaigns are going to play a massive role, presumably, now in the campaign. What typically works in the US elections?
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting because you've got different marketing campaigns at different points. It begins with needing to secure the nomination from your particular party. So each candidate, Obama and Romney, had to make the case for the reason for why they should be put forward as the presidential nominee. That's interesting because what that means is that you play to a restricted crowd, and the restricted crowd, of course, is your own particular party. So Romney had a different situation from Obama because Obama was an incumbent and was always going to be the first choice, whereas Romney wasn't the first choice. He had to make the case to be first choice. He managed to secure that. Interestingly enough, his fortunes waned and ebbed during that particular phase, but eventually he secured the nomination, and he secured the nomination to some degree by a fairly strong rhetoric. He then has to tone down that rhetoric to appeal to a more average voter, if you like, and the swing voters who were not quite sure who to vote for, and so he then has to do that in such a way that he says things which appeal to them, but which doesn't contradict what he'd said previously, and that's not an easy thing to do. Once you've secured the primary nomination, the nomination in the primaries, it's then the case of moving forward into the general election, the US general election. And the interesting thing there is that once he'd been selected, it's then about illustrating how he can be a commander-in-chief, how he can demonstrate presidentialness, if you like. And so what Romney's been trying to do is portray himself as effectively a leader in waiting. Whether he's done that is ultimately what will decide the election. So if the American people think that he really is a more credible president and leader than Obama, then it's at that point that he's likely to be elected president. However, given the nature of the debates typically have not been influential in the vast majority of post-war elections. They've played a key part in 1960, and Nixon versus JFK was effectively lost that election as a result of his appearance. On 1980, Carter lost against Reagan. And that's regarded as definitive, but by and large it has a limited impact on the election. In this election, the first debate definitely secured an advantage for Romney, no doubt about it, perhaps 4 points, put him back in the race. Without that particular extra benefit, he would have been dead in the water, I think. So it re-energised his campaign, it brought him back, and the result is that we are now neck and neck. So going into the final 2 weeks of the election, it's all about expenditure on television advertising, and it's all about the story of and the tete-a-tete, the response to each other's points and arguments in the news. And that is ultimately what will help decide the election. That and the targeting of specific swing states. The likes of the three ones that Romney needs to take him into the presidency are Ohio, Wisconsin and Nevada. If he can win those, he can win the election. We might also see some very negative campaigning, because that's often the case with direct advertising, cable television advertising. Maybe some positivity, some negativity even in the same spot. So it could go very negative at this point.
Is there anything from a leadership point of view that the candidates can do now to influence the final outcome?
Well, the important thing to remember about leadership is that without your followers, a leader isn't leading. So both of them have to do their utmost to mobilize their particular constituencies to get out and vote for them on the 6th of November. And of course, that's sometimes harder said than done, because it's really... elections are won and lost just because the volume of people who actually believe that there's a chance that that candidate that they want to support will get elected. So for both Mitt Romney and Obama, they have to actually mobilize their constituencies to get out and vote. And so it'll be very interesting in the next couple of weeks to see how they target those constituencies, particularly what kinds of messages they're trying to do to attract the people that they want to get out and vote for them on the 6th of November.
And Paul, from a marketing perspective, what they're going to be looking to achieve?
Well, some of this will come down to money. The Romney campaign has about $200 million left, which is an awful lot of money to spend on advertising in the last couple of weeks, but that's what they will do. They also have a couple of super PACs with significant funding left over, equivalent to another 100 million, which could also support advertising, third-party advertising in the election. So I think we'll see a lot of Republican third-party advertising at the last minute. Obama has less, about half of this, including himself and his super PACs. So we'll see. It'll be the Obama campaign will have a lighter impact unless they raise more money in the last 2 weeks. But then it's difficult to raise too much more given the amount of time that we've got left. So I think we'll see an incredible burst of energy from Romney in a wholehearted attempt to secure the presidency. One could argue, however, that it's already secured. Obama's leading amongst registered voters, both in the national vote and in various swing states. So one could argue that this last 2 weeks may well be a futile effort, but that's not what will be on Governor Romney's mind. He'll be doing his best to win, and given how close it is, he might well do.
Thank you both very much for your time today. It'll be an interesting couple of weeks.